Welcome to Eternal Dread, where fear never sleeps. Tell us where you're watching from, and what time it is, because terror has no limits. If you're brave enough, share and comment, but beware, something might be watching you too. Now, turn off the lights, and let the dread begin. Hello Reddit. I've spent a long time deliberating over whether to post this, or not, as the experiences described here traumatized me for quite some time. However, my fiancé tells me that sharing it with total strangers will be, if nothing else, somewhat cathartic. I hope so. I graduated from high school last year, and like many of my friends, I was so excited to go to college. I had gotten accepted at a school far away from home. I'll leave out the name here for legal reasons. But suffice to say, it was a decent school and would be my first time living away from home for any significant length of time. None of my high school friends were going to the same school as I, so for the first time in my life, I was going to be striking out on my own. As you can imagine, I was very excited. My new college was in a beach town, gorgeous weather, new environment, and it seemed like a whole new world of possibilities was opening up for me. I arrived a week early to settle into my new home, a two-man dorm in the cheapest student housing I could find. The room itself was pretty nice. After the horror stories I'd heard about dorm living, having a small kitchenette seemed like the height of luxury, so I didn't mind that there were communal showers and toilets for each floor. Now, a word about the communal bathrooms. They were capital C creepy. There wasn't anything specifically awful about them, no rotting smell or cold spots or obvious poltergeists. It was just a combination of age which had caused the tiles to crack and yellow, overuse and undercleaning, which had left some pretty gnarly mildew patches around, and a vague sense of unease whenever one entered the room. It was fine enough when the bathroom was full, as gross as that may seem, but when there were 3 showers going and a toilet flushing, well, how can anyone be creeped out? But if I ever had to go in the middle of the night and no one was around, man, I learned how to hold it. By the end of the week, I had finished settling in, and had also taken the time to familiarize myself with the campus, finalize my schedule, and start finding the local hangout spots. My assigned roommate never showed up, though, which was a little odd though not unwelcome. I was finally living on my own, but truthfully I had been a little nervous about sleeping in the same space with a total stranger. Looking back on it now, I wish my roommate had shown up after all. Maybe things would have turned out differently. In my preterm wanderings, I had started getting to know a small group of freshmen who, like me, had arrived early and were nervously excited about striking out on their own. They lived in the same housing that I did, and we decided to form a study group. Once the term started, we met up almost daily either in the library or at a local pizza shop that we just called Joe's. There were 5 of us in all: lanky, quiet David, boisterous Alex, beautiful Sarah, tiny, sarcastic Carla, and of course me. I know those descriptions sound cliché, and maybe they are, but are you really going to remember these random people without some descriptions? I'm really doing this for you, dear reader. I liked them all, of course. Not that any of them were particularly close friends of mine, but we all got along fine. Well, sort of. David was a little bit odd. I would sometimes catch him staring at me when he thought I couldn't see him. I'd catch him out of the corner of my eye and turn, just in time for him to be looking somewhere else. Or I'd catch him in a reflection, just a glimpse, quick enough to be unsure if I was really seeing it. He never seemed to do anything else but stare, so I chalked it up as a crush. Hey, I wasn't bad looking and I still had the ego of youth, or at least extreme shyness. Everything wasn't all perfect, of course. I had a heavy course load, and far more homework than I had ever been used to in high school. I had a small group of friendly acquaintances, but no close-knit group of friends like I had been used to all my life. I wasn't hurting for money, but I wasn't rich, either, and I was starting to think about picking up some part-time work, which never went far because I really had no time for it. And really, underlying all of it was a low-grade feeling of fear that soon grew almost into an outright paranoia that plagued me every time I was on campus. It didn't all happen at once. It gradually grew as the days and weeks flew by. It was the same sense of vague unease I got in the communal bathroom at home, almost like someone was watching me, someone who didn't like me very much. As time progressed, I'd get flashes of cold, and my vision would start to gray out on the edges, like flashes of movement or blackness just at the edge of what I could see. Concentrating in class got harder, and I started having nightmares. One nightmare in particular became a sort of recurring dream, and every time I had it, I woke up with a headache. It went like this. I'd be sitting in a lecture hall, taking notes, when the feeling started up. I'd get cold and my vision would start to gray out, and I'd look around, and the lecture hall was empty. I was the only one there. Then the lights would go out and there'd be this noise, like a high-pitched buzz saw. Panicking, I'd struggle up out of my seat, like moving through molasses as the noise got louder. Distant screaming started up, and the sounds formed a terrifying counterpoint. The noises got louder, closer, as I tried to bolt for the stairs, struggling through the dream thickness of the room. Then I'd trip, fall and bang my head on one of the stairs. Not hard enough to knock myself out, but damn sure hard enough to leave me dazed. Panicked, I'd roll over and look down into the dimness of the hall to see the source of the noise. A man with a medical drill, all in doctor's whites, steadily advancing up the stairs towards me, grinning. I'd struggle to get to my feet as he came closer, and then I'd wake up. What was most disturbing about the dream, though, is that every time I had it, I swear he got a little closer. The first time I dreamed it, he had just started up the stairs, but now, after a few months, he was just a few feet below me. Close enough for me to start making out some details, like the fresh bloodstains on his coat. Like the fact that he was starting to look familiar. I shrugged all of it off, of course. What was I going to do? Go see the school psychiatrist? Sorry, no. I wasn't crazy, just stressed. It was just nerves. I was in a totally new environment, finally being an adult. Of course I was going to have some problems. Which is all nice to tell myself during the day. But after waking up in a cold sweat with a pounding migraine for the 5th night in a row, I googled nightmare cure and decided to start keeping a dream journal. Dream journal. It read, if you are having recurring nightmares, it may help to keep a dream journal. Note down as many details about the nightmare as you can. Find differences between each episode and thoughts that you have about this. Make sure to write it down as soon as you wake up, before you start to forget the details. Well, what the hell? It couldn't hurt, right? I dragged myself through classes the next day, barely able to think. My migraine hadn't gone away, and the constant feeling of being watched was making me jittery. It didn't help that Halloween was getting close, so there were faux scary decorations everywhere. Fake spiderwebs are all fine and good, but I was getting sick of walking right into the middle of them and freaking out. I was leaving my last class for the day when I spotted my little study group heading the other way down the hall. I called out, "Hey guys, wait up!" Alex turned and grinned at me. "Oh, so you're alive after all," he yelled down the hall. "Are you coming or what? We haven't seen you in forever." Feeling a little better, I rolled my eyes. Maybe this was what I needed, some company and human interaction. They slowed so I could catch up as I hurried down the hall towards them. I asked, "Where are we going tonight? Library or Joe's?" Carla smirked, somewhere new. "I know this may blow your mind, but we aren't all about studying all the time. It's Friday, time for Sarah to slut it up." Sarah thwacked Carla on the arm at that, scowling. "What? It's true," protested Carla. "I don't know if I feel up to a party tonight, guys." I hesitated. "I haven't really been sleeping." "We're not going to a party," David said quietly. "Carla's just fucking with you. We're going exploring. It's an old campus, and we heard about a wing that was shut down. They never renovated it when this place became a college. We want to check it out, see what's there. There's all kinds of urban legends about it." I stared at him. I think that's the most I'd ever heard him say all in one go. He gave a little embarrassed half-shrug as we kept walking. "All right," I said. "Sounds cool, but I still have all my stuff. Can I drop it off at home first?" "Yeah," said Alex, "no worries. We aren't going there yet. We're waiting for it to get dark first. Seems more seasonally appropriate that way," he laughed. I shivered a little at that. What the hell was I getting myself into? But I didn't want these guys to know how close I was coming to a full-blown meltdown. I had to save face. Plus, there's a little part of me that's always been an adrenaline junkie, a thrill seeker, and I really just thought, why the hell not? How could it possibly get worse? I was a fool. We agreed to meet up in the quad at 9:30 that night, and I went home to eat, change, and take a short nap. Lord knows I didn't need to fall asleep in the abandoned wing of the college. I dropped my stuff on the floor, feeling the exhaustion of the week in my bones. I'll just lie down for a few minutes, I thought, then I'll make dinner. That was the last time I slept through the night. I woke up the next morning, feeling better rested than I had in weeks. I remember opening my eyes and thinking, shit. I stood them up. They probably think I wussed out. I grabbed my old brick phone and checked the texts. Sure enough, there were a handful of missed calls and a couple of texts from Alex and Carla, asking where I was. The last one said, "Okay, guess you are not coming. See you TMRW. We'll bring you a souvenir." Winky face. Well, at least they weren't mad. I checked the time, 11 a.m., and judged it late enough to give Alex a call. Straight to voicemail. Tried Carla, same. They were out late and let their phones die, don't freak out, I told myself sternly. But something felt off. Probably just the lingering sense of paranoia, or maybe something from a dream I'd forgotten. I tried to brush it off and got ready for the day. The showers were as creepy as ever, and I shivered even with the water turned almost to boiling hot. I hurried as much as I could, skipping the shampoo in favor of getting out of there fast. I tried calling Alex and Carla again as I got dressed, but their phones were still off. It was noon by this point, and I was seriously starting to worry. What if they got caught? I thought, or what if they got hurt somehow? They lived in the same building as me. Like I said earlier, David and Alex were roommates in a second-floor room, and Carla and Sarah lived together on the third floor, down the hall from me. I checked both rooms, knocked for ages, but no one answered. My worry was beginning to blossom into a full-fledged panic. Calm down, I told myself, there's nothing wrong. They probably went out drinking and got locked up for public indecency or something. But I knew that wasn't right. Maybe Alex and Carla, but David? No, something had gone wrong. I had to find them. By the time I got onto the campus, I had almost succeeded in calming myself down. Then I saw the police tape, the cop cars, the crowd of people that had gathered around. Logically, there was no way for me to know, but I knew then they were dead. I didn't know how I knew or even why that would be the conclusion, but I was certain. I was almost right. I made my way over to the police barrier, trying to get a closer look. I had to shove my way through a little knot of people, mostly people I recognized from class. Rubberneckers. I didn't want to know, but I had to know. It's all a mistake, it's all a mistake, the little voice in my head chanted. It's all a mistake. Everyone is fine. Go find out what happened, probably a drunk driver. It's all a mistake. A police officer came up to me as I started to duck my way under the caution tape. "Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to move along. There's nothing you need to see here," he said, not unkindly. I stared at him. What happened? I managed to get out, afraid to ask. Afraid to know. He frowned at me. "I'm not a rubbernecker," I said hurriedly. "But my friends, well, they were going to explore part of the campus last night, and now I can't find them, and I'm really worried that something happened to them, and..." His gaze sharpened. "What's your name, miss?" he asked suddenly. "Sam Weisberg." "Am I in trouble?" I asked. "Well," he said slowly, "I hope not. You better come with me." I followed him through the now growing crowd, shivering even in my hoodie and jeans. It was a beach town, like I said, so autumn and especially late October was starting to really cool down. I saw him look at me. He noticed my shivering, but thankfully he said nothing and steered me into the admin building. "Collins," the cop said, addressing an older man in a suit. "She may know something." "Miss Weisberg," he turned to me. "This is Detective Collins. You tell him what you just told me." The man, Collins, looked at me sharply. "I think my friends are in trouble, Mr. Collins," I said quietly. "I was supposed to meet them last night to go exploring, and I fell asleep instead. Now no one is answering their phones. They were going to explore a closed-off part of the campus, and I just have this horrible feeling. What happened? Are they okay?" Despite my best efforts, I was about to cry. "God, Sam, don't lose it now. Come on, hold it together," I thought desperately. It didn't help, being on campus. The awful feeling was back. I had an itching on my neck like a pair of eyes was boring its way through, but I couldn't look. I needed the cops to trust me. "Come on, Sam, you can do it." Collins looked at me for a moment more, almost like he knew what was happening. Then he said, "Can you tell me the names of your friends?" "Alex Davis, Carla Moreno, Sarah Sterling, and David, something with an M. Meacham or Markham, maybe." "We aren't real close," I said quickly. Something in his face, in his posture, crumpled. "I'm so sorry, Sam," he said. "There's been a terrible accident." The tears that had been damming behind my eyes started to trickle out. I furiously swiped at them. What happened? Collins hesitated. Please, I should have been with them. Please tell me what happened. He sighed. We don't know what happened, not exactly. And I can't give you a whole lot of details. But I can tell you that your friends Alex, Carla, and Sarah have passed away. A member of the cleaning staff found their bodies early this morning and alerted the police. I'm so sorry, he said quietly, watching my face, waiting to see how I'd react, I guess. Oh my God, no. I said, no, please. I just saw them. I cried in earnest then. They hadn't been my lifelong friends, and we were never super close, but I had just seen them. We had pizza together 3 days ago, and I would have been with them last night if I hadn't fallen asleep. As much as I hate to admit it, and as much as this may make me an awful person, that's really what disturbed me the most. It could have been me. Suddenly, I wanted to go home. Not back to my dorm, but really home. Back to my friends, my parents. Back to being a kid, where shit like this just didn't happen. But that wasn't an option. I was an adult. I took a deep breath. What about David? I asked, breath hitching in my chest. He would have been with them last night too. Collins and my cop looked at each other, then back at me. There was no one else there, Collins said in a way that was probably meant to be gentle. No DNA, no footprints, nothing. Are you sure David was with them? Sure he didn't skip out on the adventure? I don't know, I muttered miserably, maybe. He's a weird dude, but he seemed pretty excited about it yesterday. Can you tell us where he lives? Collins asked. Maybe he knows something that can help. I looked at him. There was something I had missed. You said there was an accident, I said slowly, but you're looking for a culprit. What aren't you telling me? Collins shook his head. Ma'am, you really don't want to know. I squared my shoulders and wiped away the last of my tears. I deserve to know. I don't need to see crime scene photos or anything like that, but I want to know the truth. How did my friends die? If I had gone last night, how would I have died? I want to know the truth. He sighed. I'm sorry, but this is an ongoing investigation. Legally, I can't give you any more details than I already have. I'll let you know if we have any further questions for you, he said firmly. Oh, and if your friend David turns up, please give me a call. He handed me his business card. My cop gently touched my elbow. All right, miss, let's get you out of here. He steered me towards the exit, and I went with him numbly. It can't be true. It's a mistake. It's a mistake. Even in my haze of shock and barely suppressed terror, I knew it was no mistake. There was something hideously wrong, not just with the deaths of my friends, but with the whole campus. Why else would I be having these feelings? I was never depressed before this, and the explanation of stress was wearing very thin. To make matters worse, the nightmares had come back with a vengeance, and keeping the dream journal was making me notice details I had missed before. The fact that the screaming was coming from figures in the center of the lecture hall, figures strapped to operating tables. The way that the screams had started to sound like my friends. The way that the evil doctor was somehow familiar, someone I knew. I just couldn't place my finger on who. And maybe worst of all, the screaming had started to coalesce into words. Help me and Run and Sam. They were screaming my name. Edit. Hey guys, I guess I shoved my thumb drive in my purse last night, so I actually have the next part to post here. My fiancé was right. It is kind of cathartic posting all this. I really shouldn't be posting at work, but what my boss doesn't know won't hurt him, right? Update number 1. I had to do something. By Tuesday, I was a wreck. I couldn't just sit and wait for insanity to arrive. I had to be proactive. So I did the only thing I could think of, research. I decided to be methodical, detached. I'd do some independent research after class. I don't have my research notes anymore, but the list I made was roughly like this. Alex, Carla, Sarah. Who were they? Some other connection? Where's David? Who is he? No DNA at crime scene. What happened? News reports, autopsy reports, think CSI. My search for some connection between them proved futile. They had come from different cities. No one seemed to have known each other before college, and their Facebooks had simply become memorial walls. They didn't even have mutual friends, other than some of the other students that we all knew. David didn't have a Facebook page, at least not that I could find. But I couldn't really remember his last name, and I probably just wasn't looking for the right guy. He still hadn't turned up, and I was getting more and more worried that something had happened to him, too, something the cops hadn't figured out yet. I didn't have a way to reach him other than class or pounding on his door, and both avenues had proved fruitless since Saturday. On the other hand, maybe he suddenly went out of town for a family emergency or something. It's not like we were really close. There's no reason he would leave me a note or anything, and like I said, we didn't have each other's phone numbers. My search for exactly what happened proved to be slightly more successful. I found a news report in one of the smaller, local journals, which detailed the assumed sequence of events. Location redacted, October 21st, 2006 students found dead in Halloween horror, homicide. The bodies of 3 redacted students were found early this morning by Frank Bloomer, a veteran member of the college janitorial staff. I came in early to restock the supply closets and smelled something awful, said Frank, something rotten and metallic. I thought some of the students had set off a stink bomb or something. You know they get real rowdy around this time of year. He went on to describe how he followed the scent to an abandoned wing of the school, one that's been under renovations for years, and stumbled upon a grisly scene. In all my years at this school, I never saw anything as bad as this, he said. Never. It was like one of those paintings, the splatter ones, all in red, all over the room. There were pieces, well, those kids were dead long before I got there. It was like the stories. That's all I'll say. I told the rest to the cops. Mr. Bloomer is not a suspect in the case. The police representative declined to comment on the investigation, which is ongoing. I shuddered. They were found in pieces? What the hell? Did they run into a pack of coyotes or a mountain lion? Was there a serial killer on campus? And what the hell did he mean, like the stories? I made a mental note to pick up pepper spray and an extra lock for the door next time I went out. I shook my head and stretched, popping the kinks in my back from having been hunched over my laptop for hours researching. I heard a quiet noise from my bedroom, a light clatter like something was knocked over, and I looked up, startled. As I shifted, the angle of my laptop screen changed and reflected the room behind me, and as it did, I caught a flash of something awful. It was Alex, but not Alex as I had known him. He was hunched over in extreme pain and clutching what was left of his abdomen with his arm. His other arm was gone, a few bone fragments jutting out. I froze, too afraid to move, too afraid to scream, utterly paralyzed as he lifted his head. There was a row of stitches above one ear, and a stream of blackened blood trickling from one eye as he raised his gaze to lock eyes with me in the reflection. The sheer horror of meeting his lifeless gaze broke my paralysis. I screamed and whirled, flinging my laptop at him, ready to run, but there was nothing there. My laptop hit the opposite wall and clattered to the floor as the battery pack flew off and skittered into the kitchenette. Breathing hard, I looked wildly around the apartment. Had I imagined that? It was so vivid, so real. It's just stress, Sam. There's no such thing as ghosts, you're just stressed. You saw the lamp or something and freaked. How can you even be sure of what you saw? You only saw it for a second. I almost believed it. I was afraid for 2 reasons. Either I was losing my mind, or there was no or. There's no such thing as ghosts. I just needed to get out of the dorm, get some fresh air. It was well after dark and a weeknight, but there's always something happening in a college town, and this one was no different. I'd never been big on parties, but I needed to be around other people. There was a regular bonfire down at the beach, about a mile's walk from the campus, and I pulled on a hoodie and some sneakers to check it out. I knew this was just paranoia talking, just the aftershock of the adrenaline rush, but I was getting that creepy feeling again, like I was being watched. I kept seeing movement out of the corner of my eye, but I'd turn and nothing would be there. I just needed to get some air. I'm not ashamed to tell you, I bolted out the door. As I hit the street, I slowed to a jog and then a walk, stuffed my hands in the pocket of my hoodie, and chuckled nervously. Man, I definitely needed to get out of there, I thought to myself. I'm starting to see things. I made my way to the beach and the usual bonfire spot, but I could tell even from a distance that there weren't many people out tonight. The fire was smoldering down to embers, and there were a few figures walking along the beach, but for the most part, it was deserted. I figured I'd at least walk down and get some space. I ran into a couple of people I recognized from class, including one guy who told me to be safe. Man, there's some crazy people out there. Oh, I know. He introduced himself as Chris and offered to walk me home, but I told him I'd be fine. He was pretty insistent. It was a little creepy, but I'm sure he meant well. My short walk turned into a longer one as my head refused to clear. The jittery, paranoid feeling had left, but what it left in its place was not much better. A bone-deep exhaustion and too many questions I had no answers for. I lost track of time as I walked along the beach, then back up into the town and wandered through the quiet streets. Asterisk, why did they have to die? Who could have done this to them? I should have been with them. I was almost with them. Asterisk. And most of all, what happened? I was sick of these questions with no answers. I looked up and found that I had successfully wandered in a giant circle right back to my front door. My exhaustion hit me again like a ton of bricks, and it was all I could do to climb the stairs back to my third-floor dorm room. I was too tired to even register the paranoia returning and the flickering movement in my peripheral vision. I chalked everything up to lack of sleep and collapsed into bed, still dressed. Almost immediately, I fell asleep and right back into the nightmare. This time I was in a different lecture hall, one I didn't recognize. It felt old and unused, like no one had been there for years. The chair I was sitting in was rusted and warped, and I knew that this was one of the rooms in the abandoned part of the campus. As soon as I realized it, everything froze like the universe taking a deep breath, and the lights went out. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't see. Could only listen as the high-pitched whine of a drill and distant screaming began. "Wake up, Sam, wake up. This is a dream, wake up." I was screaming in my own head but couldn't make a sound. The hellish counterpoint of the drill, and the screams grew louder, and I knew he was coming. I had to move. With a huge effort, I got up out of the chair and started running, slow motion, fighting to get to the stairs and get out as the sounds are coming closer and closer, and I trip. I always fucking trip, and hit my head on the stairs. Oh God, he's almost here, look over, and there he is, that fucking grin, that fucking drill. Is that Sarah strapped to the table down there? Oh God, he's almost here, wake up Sam, wake up. Gasping for air, covered in sweat, I bolted upright in bed. My head was killing me. I looked at the clock, 3:30. I'd been asleep for a few hours. I rubbed my eyes wearily, taking deep breaths. It was only a dream. I needed to get it together. I could feel the sweat drying on my body, and suddenly, more than anything, I just wanted a long, hot shower. Fuck the dream journal. I was never going to write this shit down. I was even willing to brave the creepy communal shower room. Anything would be worth scrubbing the dried sweat away. Maybe it would help my headache, too. I changed into a robe, grabbed my towel and shampoo, and headed for the door. Maybe I'll deter and take an aspirin first, I thought. My head is about to fucking explode. I kept a little first aid kit on my dresser, next to a vanity mirror. When I went to grab an aspirin, I noticed something weird in the mirror. A bruise was forming on my temple, right where I knocked it on the stairs in my dream. It was weird. I figured I must have knocked my head on the bed frame or something. I swallowed the painkiller and shrugged it off. It was just one of those things, a small weirdness in the ocean of weirdnesses I was currently treading water in. I just needed to shower, get the remnants of the nightmare out of my head, and get on with it. As I walked down the hall to the shower room, I started getting that itchy, scared feeling on the back of my neck again, but I refused to look behind me. Everything is fine, there's nothing there, I told myself. It's 3 a.m., and you just had a nightmare. Come on, Sam, put on your big girl panties and deal with it. The shower room was dark and empty when I got there. A heaviness settled in the pit of my stomach, and the muscles along my spine tightened. There's nothing to be scared of. It's just a room, I told myself. I wasn't very convincing. Moving quickly, I flipped on the lights and turned on one of the showers, letting the water heat up. As the first curls of steam started rising, I felt myself start to relax the tiniest bit. I even started humming a little, some pop song that was playing endlessly at the time. I hung up my robe and towel, grabbed the shampoo, and pulled the curtain closed as I stepped over the lip of the shower stall and into the spray of hot water. Eyes closed, I tilted my head back and started lathering shampoo into my hair, still humming. That's when I heard it. Scrape. The unmistakable sound of someone quietly opening a door. I immediately went still, stopped humming, practically stopped breathing. My eyes were still closed, and my hair was full of shampoo. I was petrified, straining my ears to hear anything else. Seconds ticked by, and my heartbeat throbbed in my ears. All I could hear was the sound of the shower and my own shallow breathing. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it's just one of the other residents who woke up and had to take a piss. Just as I was about to relax, just before I brushed it off as my imagination running wild, I heard another sound, one that made my blood run cold. It was a kind of shuffling, dragging noise like slow footsteps, and it was getting closer. I frantically started scrubbing the shampoo from my hair, as quickly and silently as I could manage. I couldn't take being blind. I had to see what was happening. It felt like an eternity when really it probably only took seconds. But by the time I could see again, I was in full-fledged panic mode. I stared at the shower curtain, straining to see any shape or movement through the thin plasticky cloth. But I couldn't tell who was there, if anyone. I steeled my nerves, took a deep breath, and very carefully peeked around the edge of the curtain. Nothing. The room was empty. I let out a huge, gusty sigh of relief, turned around to turn off the water, and came face to face with Carla. But it wasn't Carla as I had known her. She was clinging to the ceiling like an enormous, bloated spider, with her head hanging down to look me in the eye. Her limbs had been dislocated and were at unnatural angles. Her neck was impossibly long, and I could see the vertebrae sticking out where her neck had been cleanly snapped, so hard that the bone burst through the skin. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when her dead eyes focused on me, when she leaned closer, close enough to touch, close enough to kiss, and whispered to me, with breath like the grave, "Run." I'll be honest with you. I blacked out. I woke up in my dorm, curled in the corner of my closet, rocking back and forth. I had left all my things in the shower room, and was soaking wet and completely naked. I still had the bruise on my temple, which had started aching again, and a massive bruise down my left side. I also had skinned palms and knees, and somehow I'd ripped off a toenail. All that being said, I felt lucky to be alive. Note, okay, it's broad daylight right now, thank God, but I'm still giving myself the creeps, and my boss just stopped by to ask if everything was okay. I'm gonna go fabricate a reason to get out of the office for a little bit. Next part should be up soon. When I was a kid, I had a pretty typical suburban childhood. White picket fences, ticky-tacky suburban houses, endless concrete for my friends and me to ride our bikes on, and the only strangers we saw were the occasional drifter or traveler that wandered through our town. My dad worked at the steel mill, my mom was a homemaker. I remember afternoons off from school filled with bike rides, trips to the arcade, Boy Scout meetings, and exploring Stokes Woods that lay just off the secluded neighborhoods we all lived in. Stokes Woods was where my friends and I had so many firsts. It was the first bit of real freedom we had. We spent summer days exploring, making maps, and setting up camps that would be found again later to our great amusement. It was our first brush with death, too, finding birds or animal carcasses on the trail. We poked them with sticks and edit the bugs that crawled out of them. We never guessed that one day we might share their fate. I was in the woods the first time I swore, yelling "damn it," as I skinned my knee when I was 8. I was in the woods the first time I saw a naked woman. The glossy pages of Terry's dad's Playboy gripped in my sweaty hand as we sat around a campfire when I was 11. It hosted my first camping trip there, and it was the first place I was allowed to camp alone. Well, with Terry and Reggie, but it was our first time out alone at night. It was also where we found the tree house. The tree house was a relic of kids gone by. It was in a big old tree set into a clearing, a fire pit dug in its shadow, with a dumbwaiter to pull things up and rope ladder to climb up through a trap door. It had been built in pieces. There was a wall inside with the signatures of kids who had added to it, complete with dates when they had completed them. When we came across it one afternoon, our 9-year-old eyes growing wide with wonder, we knew we had found something special. Over the next few weeks, we replaced the rope ladder, cleaned out the fire pit, and replaced the dumbwaiter rope. We painted it too, finding some paint at the junkyard and painting the faded treasure in a wash of purples and browns and gold. We added a bike rack, again with wood from the junkyard, and signed our names and date to the wall when the project was done. The easy trip to and from the yard made me believe that the treehouse might have been constructed from things they found in the junkyard. We asked Old Man Macy, the caretaker, and he said that kid had been coming and going for years, taking stuff for a project in the woods. He was glad it had been put to such good use. We had been playing and camping and using the treehouse for a couple of years when Terry suggested a Halloween sleepover. It's on a Friday. We can camp out in the treehouse, eat candy, and tell scary stories. I thought it sounded like a great idea, and my parents agreed. 3 kids alone in the woods may sound weird to some of you, but the town we lived in was very rural. Our town had a population of around 1,200, and crime was almost non-existent. Besides the odd traveler that sometimes blew through, you knew your neighbors very well. We had camped in the woods for the last 2 years, and the Boy Scouts had taught all of us how to camp safely and not burn down the woods. That night, we all hit the streets as soon as the lamps came on. We set out with pillowcases in hand and embarked on a sweet journey to collect the most candy. As we always did, we had a theme, and we were all dressed as Avengers when we went out to trick or treat. I was Hawkeye, bow slung over my shoulder, homemade costume and cheap mask covering my eyes. Reggie was the Hulk, body painted green with absurd foam Hulk hands on his real hands, and a cheesy mask frozen into the eternal grimace. Terry was Captain America, his store-bought costume topped off by a trash can lid shield that he had painted a star on. We moved from house to house, striking poses and delighting adults as they filled our pillowcases with candy. By the time the porch lights started going out, we had bulging sacks ready to burst from candy. We stopped at our homes, dropping off a little excess candy and getting our camping stuff. We told our parents where we were going, and my mom kissed me goodnight and told me to come straight home if there was an emergency. And with that, we set off. We walked the familiar trails into the woods. Our backpacks were bulging from our candy sacks, and the night was lit by a full and ghostly moon. Terry and Reggie talked excitedly about the candy, wanting to tell ghost stories as we ate it, but I kept getting distracted. I could swear there was a noise out in the woods, a bird, or a high-pitched wind. As we moved towards the treehouse, it seemed to follow us. The other 2 were oblivious, but the sound made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It came closer and closer, never quite reaching us but seeming to pass us sometimes. I heard it behind us, heard it in front of us, and how the others were oblivious was beyond me. When the treehouse rose up to greet us, it was a real relief. In the light of the full moon, though, it looked ghostly and strange. I had thought the noise would cease to be an issue once we arrived, but it didn't. As we loaded our bags on the dumbwaiter, I could swear that the whistling still surrounded us. I rushed them a little, gaining some grumpy looks, but I wanted to be out of the woods and into the safety of the treehouse. Once we were safe inside, lanterns on, and candy spilled onto the floor, I began to feel at ease. This was our sanctuary. Nothing bad could happen to us here. We were children who had yet to experience loss or real trauma. We were secure in our knowledge that our parents would still protect us from anything, no matter how bad it got. We were foolish, but children are supposed to be foolish, I guess. Reggie was halfway through one of the full-sized candy bars the Hudsons had been giving out when Terry suggested we start ghost stories. Terry loved scary stories, and he usually had a pretty good collection of them from the internet or wherever. Reggie pulled a beanbag chair over from a corner, and I dragged a camp chair over so we could group up around the lantern. Typically, we would tell our stories around the fire pit, but I think we all sensed that tonight it was better to be inside. Halloween was unique somehow. It was best to be inside after dark. Terry brought the flashlight up under his chin, tilting the light knob down on the lantern, and grinned at us ghoulishly. "This is a true story. I swear it on my life," he said theatrically before beginning his story. He told us a story about a kid plagued by the ghost of a hobo he and his friends had accidentally killed. They had been playing a trick on him, and he had choked to death on a sandwich. After he died, the boy kept seeing him around, in windows or on street corners, but his friends wouldn't believe him. Then, while the boys were at a sleepover, the ghost struck. I found myself distracted as he told the story, though. The wind blew against our treehouse, creaking it in the branches of the old tree, but beneath the wind was a sound. That same whistling was coming from outside, a high-pitched keen that was not altogether tuneless. As I listened to it, it almost seemed to move through the surrounding trees as Terry wove his story. Terry came to the climax of his story, and the boy's friends died badly. The boy escaped the sleepover and ran back to his home. The ghostly hobo dogged his heels, screaming his name as he chased him through the quiet streets, but the boy had made it home and slammed the door in his rotting face. He had leaned against it, safe at last, but as the banging began, he remembered one important fact. His parents were gone, Terry said, grinning in the flashlight beam. He might have made it home, but he was still at the mercy of the ghostly apparition. Terry told us how the door had bowed inward, the ragged hands pushing the wood like wax paper, but I felt my attention dragged away again. I could still hear the whistling again, closer now, and I could swear there was another noise too. Rustling leaves, maybe, or leaves crackling underfoot. Was someone outside our treehouse? And as Patches pushed at his door, trying to catch him, the boy snuck out of his window and disappeared into the night, never to be seen again. Terry seemed to notice, then, that I wasn't really paying attention. "Oh, come on, that was a great story." "Huh? Yes, sorry. Something was distracting me outside." Reggie looked quizzically at me. "What was it?" "I thought I heard someone outside moving around on the leaves." Terry turned to look at the bare window, and Reggie walked over to look out into the inky blackness. The moon cast an odd light over his face, but as he scanned the ground, it gave away no sudden surprise. He shrugged his already broad shoulders and returned to his bean bag chair. He reached for a candy bar and started unwrapping the silver foil. "Nothing there," he said after Terry, and I stared at him for a few seconds. Must have been the wind. Terry began another story about a shadowy creature that lived in a stairwell. As he laid out the narrative, though, I could hear the whistling again. It wormed into my consciousness, spinning through the trees outside like a drunken bird. I could hear the leaves crunching again, the wind making them rustle like skeletal wind chimes, and suddenly I too wanted to go to the window and look into the night. I was trying to listen to Terry's story, but the more I tried to pay attention to it, the more I heard the noises from down below. Terry looked miffed when I interrupted his story to drag up the rope ladder. I latched the hatch and came back to find him with his arms crossed and an indignant look on his face. "Think you can do a better story? Well then, hotshot, have at it." He tossed the flashlight at me, and I caught it by reflex. I thought about it for a moment and realized that I did have a story I could tell. Maybe by getting it out, I could alleviate the fears that had been consuming me. I was ruining my Halloween campout for what? Some noise outside the treehouse? It was probably just a raccoon or something that had been spooked when we arrived. My unease had given me the perfect story, though. So these three kids were walking in the woods. They were going camping, and were going to a familiar spot in the woods to set up. They left their homes at dusk, wanting to camp out under the stars in just their sleeping bags. Their parents told them that if anything went wrong, they could come home and sleep there, but the boys had done this 100 times and felt that they knew the woods like the back of their hands. They felt like nothing in the woods could surprise them. They were wrong. Terry sneered, but he sat close to the lantern and listened nonetheless. Reggie opened another candy bar, the story drawing him in, as the stories almost always did. Reggie didn't really seem to like scary things. He was kind of a scaredy cat, but he liked stories. He would sit and listen, getting more and more terrified, but always beg for another when you were done. They walked towards the determined campsite, talking animatedly about the s'mores they would make and the scary stories they would tell. One of them kept hearing something as they walked, though. He heard the snap of a twig, the crunch of a leaf, and it made him wary. He told his friends, but they shrugged it off as nothing. It was late afternoon, the sun was setting, and animals were coming out to forage. They were probably just hearing animals moving around in the dry leaves. The two of them went back to walking, talking between themselves, but the third kept listening, kept looking over his shoulder to see what lay behind. Terry and Reggie were paying attention, Terry a little begrudgingly. Reggie's eyes were large and starry as he listened. As I told the story, I almost thought I could hear the leaves crackling outside. The wind in the trees rattled the dying year's foliage against the limbs, and a low whistle could again be heard outside. It was tuneless and wafting as it warbled across my sanity. I knew just what was stalking these kids through the woods as I began to spin their tale. He kept asking them to listen, telling them it was important, but they wouldn't listen to him. They kept walking, kept talking, and all the while, the crunching of leaves and the rusting of limbs followed them, getting closer and closer. The boy became afraid. The steps sounded large, but he couldn't see anything in the trees as they proceeded down the trail. One of the others finally yelled at him, telling him to stop being stupid and just enjoy the trip. There was nothing out there. No one, but he could hear it. He was being stupid. He needed to relax. I paused for dramatic effect, seeing Terry roll his eyes at the description of the boy in the story. That's when they heard the whistling, and I imagined I could still hear that whistling outside the treehouse. It was getting closer and closer as I told the story. Was the story drawing it in? Was I calling it to the treehouse? But by now, though, I couldn't stop myself. The story needed to be told, and I had become a conduit for it. I would tell it to the end, even if the whistler came right up the tree after us. They all froze when they heard the whistling. This was no wind through the boughs of a tree. This was a tuneless, monotonous whistling that cut across the dying afternoon like a sickle through wheat. It was behind them, seemingly on the trail, and they could hear it getting closer and closer. They began to make their way towards the campsite, walking a little faster, but all three looked over their shoulder now. They were all made uneasy by that whistling, and they all wanted to put some distance between themselves and it. My friend sat forward, hanging on my every word, entranced by this new development. Outside, I imagined I could hear the whistling coming from just outside the clearing. They didn't talk anymore, they didn't laugh, and they didn't joke. They let their feet take them ever onward, but the whistling followed them. The friend who had insisted it was nothing said that maybe they should speed up a little bit. The campsite couldn't be far. Once they were there, they could take a side trail and get back to town. Or whatever it was would leave, and they could get back to their campout. The other two agreed, but all of them knew that the campout was already canceled. None of them would sleep here tonight, not willingly. They sped up, but the whistling followed them steadily. One of them said they should stop and confront the whistler. He must be human. Who else or what else could whistle? The other two shot him down, though. The whistling was discordant, jangling against their nerves, sounding like nothing they had ever heard before. Both agreed that they didn't want to find out what whistled like that, and kept moving. Something bumped the bottom of the tree, but my audience didn't seem to notice. It wasn't a hard bump. It didn't shiver the whole tree. It felt more like an inquisitive tap, a gentle knock. Someone trying to get our attention. I put it out of my mind, maybe the wind or something, and kept telling. They kept moving deeper and deeper into the woods, all the time being chased by the whistling. They broke into a run, the campsite still not coming into view, and still, the whistling grew closer and louder. The whistling took on a life of its own, rising and falling as its chaotic tune became less and less discernible. The children put their hands over their ears, the noise scraping across their minds like a rusty scalpel. The hands would not block out the whistling, though. They heard it inside their heads as it battered their senses, and when the first one tripped, the other two did not stop to help him. They didn't hear his screams, but they felt a change when the whistling thing got him. A night bird called out from the forest, but now the whistling was in my own head, and I only registered it as something different. I told the story frantically, hoping it would stop the whistling in my head somehow. They dropped their packs and ran. They sprinted flat out, knowing that the trail must be just up ahead. They would round the bend, and there it would be. It would be there as it always was, and they could cut back towards town. It never occurred to them that the creature could just cut through the forest after them. The trail to town had a talismanic effect on them. If they could make it, if they could walk it, they would be safe. They ran, they wept, but the whistling followed them on and on. Their feet crunched against the leaves and pine needles, sounding like gunfire, but they hardly noticed over the eerie whistling in their heads. My two friends were leaning close now, the lantern making their faces look like jack-o'-lanterns as their eyes begged for the climax. And still that whistling assaulted me, threatening to drive me mad. If they noticed it, they gave no indication. When the second boy fell, the first never noticed. He ran and ran, trying to outdistance the whistling, trying to get it out of his head, and when his friend was found, the whistling again took on a different tone. The lone boy ran and ran, hoping to outdistance the crazed whistling, knowing that his fate would be the same as his friend's. Some say he runs to this very day. Some say the whistling got him in the end. No one knows for sure. I heard the whistling abate a little. It didn't leave, but it did lighten slightly. I felt like crying as I came to the end of my story. Maybe I would be allowed to live where the boys had died. The search parties found their backpacks 2 days later, animals having worried them to get at the food. They found the campsite bare, no fire having been lit in weeks. Of the boys, they found no sign. No trace was ever found, not a scrap of clothing, not a footprint. They were never seen again, but the children in the area say that you can hear the whistling in the woods on quiet nights. On those nights, it is best to stay indoors. The whistling takes all who venture too close, and the whistling will haunt you for the rest of your life, however long that is." That was when the whistling stopped. It stopped so abruptly that I wondered if it had ever been there at all. For a 10-year-old to question his mental stability is a strange feeling, but at that moment, I was just glad it had passed me by. The other two shook off their rapture, looking as though they had been hypnotized, and Terry blew out a long breath. "Well, damn, that was a good story. I can't top that, and suddenly I'm feeling kind of tired." "Yeah," Reggie said dreamily, "me too. I think maybe we should go to bed." I would have argued with them most nights, but tonight, I was as drained as the rest. We laid out our sleeping bags and burrowed down, dropping off quickly without the usual talk that precedes it. I'd like to tell you that this is where the story ends. I wish I could, but that wouldn't be doing justice to the memory of my friends. I awoke in the wee hours of the morning when someone threw a pillow at me. It was not thrown playfully. The throw was hard, angry, and directed at my face. I sat up, rubbing my cheek, and became aware of the keening whistle that had returned. It was louder than ever, and it chilled me to the bone. "For God's sake, stop it!" Terry yelled, staring daggers at me. "Your story was good. We all said so, but trying to scare us with this stupid whistling isn't funny." I heard someone crying, and looked over to see Reggie in the corner with his hands against his face. The whistling was loud and discordant, just as I had described it in my story, and it appeared that I wasn't the only one who could hear it now. Terry looked madder than I had ever seen him, and Reggie was clearly terrified after the story I had spun. "It's not me, I swear," I told Terry. He glared at me for a few seconds before realizing that I was right. He had woken me up. How could I be the whistler? He moved to the window, and I joined him, trying to see the source of the whistling. Most nights, we would have seen nothing in the inky darkness, but under the light of the full moon, the yard was shadowy but visible. As we scanned the yard, we could see little. The fire pit below, the logs we sat on as we toasted our marshmallows and whiners, the woodpile we had tarped against the rain. I had almost decided to go check the other window when Terry gasped like a stepped-on cat. I looked and saw a man in a long cloak step out of the tree line. He was dressed in a dark gray coat, long and flowing like a trench coat, and a tall cowboy hat making him look almost 7 feet tall as it poked for the skies. The toes of pointy boots poked from beneath the cloak, and I thought they looked battered and scuffed, even from here. The wind seemed loath to touch him, but by the way he pulled the cloak around himself, you'd have thought he was freezing. I could see a pair of eyes reflect the moonlight as he looked up at us, and thought he must be wearing glasses. Of him, we could see very little under the cloak, but he made me very uneasy. The whistling seemed to be coming from beneath the cloak, and when it stopped, he began to speak, and I wished for the whistling again. His voice was raspy, pinched, croaksome. A dead man's pleading last words. "I'm so cold, boys. Might I take shelter in your treehouse for the night?" I shuddered, not knowing what to say. Somehow, Terry found his voice. "Go away. Our mothers told us not to talk with strangers, and we don't know you. Please, boys, kind boys. Didn't your mothers teach you hospitality? Let an old man come in out of the cold," he pleaded. "No," Terry said, and moved away from the window as though the man might somehow leap through the window. The man didn't yell. He didn't plead. He just sat on the log beneath our tree and continued to whistle. The jagged cords wafted up into the treehouse, and I saw Terry shudder. He picked up a boot that had been part of my costume and went to the window to throw it at the man. Terry sent it sailing, but hissed when it didn't connect. He threw several other things as the whistling assaulted us, but the old man never seemed to be where he was aiming. Terry cussed loudly, reaching for the lamp. I wrapped my arms around it, begging him not to. "It's all the light we have, Terry. Please." He tore it out of my arms, growling as it came free. He chucked it at the old man, the heavy plastic thing not even getting close to the target. It broke on the ground, shattering and fizzling with an electric pop. The inside of the treehouse was darker for its passing, the three of us now sitting in near darkness. The whistling went on, though. The man never seemed to run out of breath, and the shrill noise took its toll on all of us. Reggie began to rock in the corner, sobbing loudly as the man whistled and whistled below. Terry screamed at him from the window, his rage never-ending, as I covered my ears and tried to keep the threads of my sanity together. It seemed to last for hours, for days, and as I sat with my eyes closed, I prayed it would end. When I heard the floorboards creak, I opened my eyes. I saw Reggie standing by the window, his foot already on the ledge. "Reggie?" I breathed, half getting up. "What are you doing?" Reggie looked back at me, snot runners creeping down his face. His naked face looks tortured, tears cutting lines down his dirty cheeks, still streaked with green. He smiled gruesomely at me as he framed himself in the window, and I didn't have to ask what he intended to do. I tried to stop him. I pulled myself up from the floor to go to him, but it was already too late. "I just want it to stop," he breathed before he threw himself out the window. We never heard him hit the ground over the loud and terrible whistling. Terry stormed over to the hatch and had unlatched it before I could throw myself across it. "What are you doing?" I breathed. "What do you think I'm doing?" "I'm gonna go do something about this guy. He's an adult, Terry. You can't do anything to him. Get out of my way. I'm going out there. He's scary, Terry. You shouldn't go out there. You'll end up like Reggie, you'll..." Terry kicked me, sending waves of pain through my guts, and I rolled off the trap door. I heard him throw it open and toss the ladder down, descending in a shrieking rage as he made for the Whistler. As scared as it had made Reggie, the whistling had made Terry a furious juggernaut. I drew myself up, my ribs hurting, and hobbled to the trap door. I looked down before closing it and gasped in horror against my throbbing chest. The man was at the bottom of the ladder. His face was still hidden by the coat, his eyes a glittering twosome amidst the swirling dark void, and I could see thick red fluid around the collar of the cloak. He was 2 rungs up the ladder, temporarily frozen by my gaze, and I slammed the hatch and threw the lock a second before he slammed into it. I crawled away from the hatch, seeing it buck wildly and hearing him scream at me to open it. He cussed and howled like an animal, wanting to get in, but stopped by the strong bolt some past child had installed on the sturdy hatch. Maybe they had installed it to keep him out, I thought. My fear overtopped me at some point, and as I watched the door jump in its frame, I must have passed out. When the banging woke me up, it was daylight, and I screamed loud enough to startle whoever had been banging. "Easy, kid, it's Sheriff Blask. Are you okay?" I dragged myself to the hatch, my ribs aching, and threw the bolt before falling back, panting. If it was the Whistler, I hoped he was quick, at least. My ribs would turn out to be broken, and their healing would encompass 2 of the worst months of my life. Every time I breathed in, I was reminded of the Whistler and that last encounter with Terry. At that moment, though, I didn't care what happened. I just wanted it to end. Sheriff Blask pushed the flap open, though, and I guessed I'd get to live another day. He took me to the hospital. He took me to the waiting arms of my parents, who pulled me into their warm embrace and threatened to never let go. I had been missing for 2 days, they told me, and when the police had seen the state of our treehouse, they feared the worst. They never found any sign of Terry or Reggie. I told them what had happened. I told them about the whistling man, Reggie's fall, and Terry charging from the treehouse to attack him. I told them about how I'd locked the trap door and passed out as I watched the man try to batter his way in. They took my statement, searched those woods with officers and dogs and every able-bodied set of legs in town, but they never found anything. Not a scrap of cloth, not a drop of blood. My friends were just gone. That was 8 years ago. I've seen that night in my dreams every night since. The events live on in my memories, and I often wake up screaming as the man tries to break the hatch open. In my dreams, I don't pass out. In my dreams, the hatch doesn't hold. In my dreams, I wake up as he wraps his hands around my throat and drags me towards that pitch-black maw he hides behind the coat. I haven't been back to the forest since that day, and I don't think I ever will. Lately, though, I've been hearing the whistling as I lie in bed at night. I look out the window, my backyard butting up to the woods, and see 2 small figures hovering on the outskirts. Sometimes the man in the coat is there too, but I know better than to try and tell my parents. They're gone when they get there, and I just end up looking crazy. I leave for college next week, and I've chosen one in the middle of a big city. I plan to attend it because the closest collection of more than 4 trees is 60 miles from my dorm. I'm hoping that distance will stop these apparitions, but I don't know. I can hear the whistling now, even as I write this. I can hear my dead friends' soft calls as they entice me to come out and play. I can hear that whistling as it scrapes against my nerves yet again. I hear it, and I hope that I get to leave for college before it becomes too much to bear. Before, it calls me back to the treehouse once more. Alright, long story short, my name is Cam, and I'm a virologist. If you've never heard of that title, it's just a person who studies/researches viruses and any biological agents resembling them. It's a decent job, pays well and keeps me interested. I've never really thought about pursuing anything else. That was until last night. We've discovered something very bad. I was part of a 5-person team in a small lab situated up in the mountains of a Western European country. I'm not going to give too many specifics here. The project was spearheaded by a particularly exceptional microbiologist. Let's call him Hathaway. Now, Hathaway had been on vacation for a while in South America. Everybody who worked closely with him or knew him well thought this was incredibly strange. I mean, the guy never took a break. However, it all made sense when he came back. He looked like absolute shit. There were heavy bags under his eyes and scratches all over his face. He was jittery as all hell and could barely string together a coherent sentence. As we would learn later, he was never actually on vacation. I guess you could say that it was more like a business trip of sorts. Apparently, he'd been in contact with a colleague of his based in Chile. He'd been informing Hathaway about some peculiar events occurring in a small village near the coast. Something to do with a potential unknown disease. The specifics remained a mystery to us at the time. All Hathaway said was that it was worth looking into. What worried a lot of us were the cuts on his face and forearms. When asked about it, he simply claimed that he'd fallen down a few times while hiking. Without knowing what else to believe, we just bought it. Besides, the prospect of studying a new virus was incredibly intriguing. This might have been something big. We got to work right away. As the 5 of us, me, Hathaway, Jake, Beth and Colin, congregated in the main lab, Hathaway carried in what appeared to be a fortified glass tank containing a single bird. I think it was an Andean condor, native to Chile. I'll be honest, I was a bit worried at that point. We didn't even bother asking how he got it past border security. Tell me this isn't some derivative of the bird flu, Jake asked. No, Hathaway responded. I have no idea what it is, actually. We all collectively raised our eyebrows at this. You see, it's definitely not airborne. You can also touch the bird as much as you like. Nothing will happen to you. It's transmitted some other way. That's when I noticed that the bird was actually blindfolded. I don't know why I hadn't earlier. Why nobody had even pointed it out. I guess my subconscious wasn't expecting such a bizarre sight. Don't tell me it has something to do with that, I asked, pointing to where its eyes should have been. Everybody else seemed to catch on to the strange detail. Hathaway stayed quiet for a second, staring at the ground before finally nodding. Are you kidding me? Jake inquired. How does that work? Wait, what the hell's even wrong with the bird? I found myself blurting out. Although it was a fair question. Upon initial glance at it, nothing at all seemed to be off. The only somewhat strange thing was that it hadn't moved much. Hathaway sighed. Not at first, right? He dug around in his bag and pulled out another, smaller tank. It was filled with beetles. We'll do a demonstration here. He walked over to the bird tank and dumped all of the beetles in. Jesus Christ! I heard somebody mutter from behind me. Once Hathaway was finished, he turned back to us. His expression at the time was dead serious. In the gravest tone that I'd ever heard come from him, he spoke to us. I'm about to take the blindfold off of the bird. Whatever you do, don't look at it. In fact, just leave the room. I'll tell you when you can come back. I think that we all hesitated for just a second when he said that. What the hell was going on? Eventually, we all just did as we were told. We stood out in the hall in absolute silence for maybe about 3 minutes. At that time, I couldn't understand why it took so long for him to take a damn blindfold off. But then the noises started. I can't even find a way to describe them. They couldn't have come from a bird, that's for sure. Or at least they shouldn't have. If anything, it was like a screech, except extremely deep and guttural, and also somehow discombobulated. A few seconds later, we heard Hathaway screaming expletives. It sounded like he was in pain. We stood there frozen, not knowing at all what to do. Eventually, we were called back in. Hesitantly, I went first. As soon as I stepped in there, I saw Hathaway disinfecting his hand, which was now cut open. As he started wrapping it up, I turned my attention to the bird. It looked the same as it was before. The only difference was that it was covered in beetle guts. So were the glass walls of the tank. After we'd all settled down from the initial shock, Hathaway tried to explain what the hell had just happened. Here's what I think. Somehow, This virus is transferred upon direct eye contact with an infected specimen dash. What the fuck? Jake interjected. No, fuck that. It makes absolutely no sense, dash. You think I don't know that? Hathaway interrupted back. Just listen, alright? Anyways, there aren't any immediate indications when something's been infected. They'll act exactly the same as they were before. At least at first. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when they start changing. I'd say maybe 3 hours, tops. But once they do, you notice. The best thing you can do is to blindfold them. That way you can't get infected, and the subject loses all of its symptoms. Well, I suppose that the best thing to do is to actually blind them, but I had to demonstrate first. Now we just have to figure out what the hell's actually going on. After that brief and albeit somewhat unsatisfying explanation, we went to work. But shit only kept getting stranger. After we'd blinded and killed the bird, Hathaway instructed us to start dissecting the brain. At first, we were tentative. After witnessing what had just happened, we were scared as hell of contracting whatever the hell it was that the bird had. Besides, we weren't even trained surgeons. However, Hathaway insisted that the only way this virus could be transmitted was by eye contact. As strange as this all was, we just went along with it. His reasoning for dissecting the brain first was that he'd made the assumption that this virus must be affecting the host on a mainly psychological basis. As it turns out, he was right. Once the brain was exposed, we noticed something truly inexplicable. Something was moving around in there. We all turned to Hathaway, hoping for further explanation. It's a parasite? Beth asked, looking mortified. Hathaway shook his head, looking incredibly confused. No, it shouldn't be. The bird's been alive for weeks after infection. I see no signs of physical deterioration, no nutrient deficiencies, none of that. We were all absolutely baffled at this point. What kind of fucking virus is large enough to be visible? We just stared at it, not knowing what to do. Then out of nowhere, the brain started bulging outwards. Hathaway's face dropped. It must know that the host is dead. It's trying to come out. Thinking quickly, I went and grabbed a nearby beaker. I managed to trap the thing just as it burrowed its way out. I really didn't know what the hell to expect at that point, but it didn't stop me from being completely surprised at the appearance of the thing. It looked absolutely alien. It nearly resembled a bacteriophage, except for the fact that it seemed to have tiny suction cups covering it. The head also appeared to be partially mechanical, with tubes protruding out and connecting to the legs. It was about the size of a black widow spider. I heard a cacophony of screams ring throughout the room, while Hathaway shouted at me to not let it out. As everything started settling down, we managed to transport it into another glass tank, this time smaller and more fortified. We spent the next 12 hours observing and analyzing it. The conclusion that we came to? It made no fucking sense. We couldn't classify it, nor make sense of its various parts. Hell, the thing was too fucking huge to be any kind of pathogen. We would have written it off as some kind of undiscovered jungle creature, but the fact remained that it seemed to affect the behaviors of its host organisms. Eventually, we decided to just secure and leave it, planning to continue our research the next day, even though that was unlikely to yield any solid results. Most of us even considered just turning it over to the government. We sure as hell didn't know what to do with it. However, Hathaway declined that proposition. We'll figure out what it is, he claimed, sounding somewhat unconfident. This is big, alright? I'm not letting it go just yet. Tired as hell, and not wanting to get into an argument, we all decided to head off to our separate temporary dorms in order to get some rest. What a big fucking mistake that was. We should have burned that thing right then and there. I remember lying in bed that night when a troubling thought creeped into my head. If the way that this virus was transmitted was by making eye contact with an infected organism, then wouldn't looking directly at the virus itself cause something similar to happen? How the hell would that even work? Did it replicate through our thoughts? Or did it need to control optical nerves in order to spread? How could that even make sense? But then again, none of this really did. However, I did recall Hathaway claiming that symptoms would surface 3 hours tops after the initial infection. It had been a hell of a lot longer than that. Being somewhat reassured, I passed out. I woke up about 4 hours later. I groggily rubbed my eyes, wondering what could have taken me out of my slumber. I'm usually a very deep sleeper. As I awoke back into reality, I heard it. Somebody was mumbling down the hall. It sounded like Jake. I got up and opened my door, planning to confront him. I stepped out and saw his silhouette, shrouded in darkness about 20 meters away. His back was turned to me, so I prepared to call out. That's when I felt somebody cover my mouth and pull me into an adjacent hallway. Reeling at the initial shock, I looked behind me and realized that it was Hathaway. I was about to shout at him once he let me go, but he motioned for me to be quiet. I also saw the desperation in his eyes. I stayed silent as he gestured me back towards the lab. I realized that we were fucked as soon as I saw what had happened. The reinforced glass tank, where we had been holding the virus, was empty. Whatever this thing was, it was out. Don't look into his eyes. Hathaway told me in reference to Jake. We weren't careful enough. It must have infected him. Did he open the fucking tank? I asked him. He shook his head. No way. You need a password for it. It's not even written down anywhere, only I know it. I looked back at the tank in abject confusion. There weren't any cracks on it or anything. There was no feasible way out. But how the hell dash? I began to ask him, but he cut me off. Look, I don't know. Maybe there's a lot more about this thing that we can't understand. He sighed, throwing his hands behind his head. My mind started racing. If this virus, or whatever it was, could have escaped at any time, then why didn't it make a move earlier? This thing must have been smarter than we'd anticipated. I guess it somehow knew that it had a better chance of escaping when nobody was monitoring it. But how did it escape? My thoughts were interrupted when we heard a knocking coming from outside the lab door. Hello? A voice called out. It was Colin. I got up to open the door, but Hathaway pulled me back down. What the hell? I barked at him. Let him in before he sees Jake. What if he already has? Hathaway responded. And then I thought about it. It takes around 3 hours for the symptoms to manifest. So even if he's been infected, he wouldn't know it yet. The hell are you guys doing in there? I can hear you. Let me in. Jake's being really fucking weird. It's actually kind of scary. Weird how? Hathaway asked. Well, he woke me up when he walked past my door. Actually, I think he was standing right outside. Yeah, he was mumbling something. I opened the door and asked him what the hell he was doing. It was dark, but I could tell that he was just staring at me. And then he started rambling. It was absolute nonsense. He was stringing words together, but none of it made any sense. After a while of him not responding to a word I said, I gave up and walked past him. That was like 5 minutes ago. Look, are you guys gonna come out or what? What are we supposed to do? Hathaway and I exchanged worried glances. If Jake really was infected, then so was Colin. We didn't move. For fuck's sake, what are you doing? Colin went on, sounding more agitated now. Is there a reason that you won't let me in? That was followed by silence. A few seconds later, we heard him mumbling something. Shit, tell me that Jake wasn't infected. I guess our silence was enough of an answer. No fucking way. So what happens next? Hathaway, what the hell am I supposed to do then? Hathaway just sighed and shook his head. I don't know. I'm sorry. We heard him shout some more expletives before walking away, fuming. We sat there for a while after that, having no idea what to do. Is there an emergency escape in here? I asked him. No, but it wouldn't matter anyways. We can't let those guys out of here. I've yet to see what effects it has on a human, but it can't be anything good. And don't even ask me about a cure. I don't know. So what are you saying? I asked him, dreading the answer. Best case scenario is that we blindfold and restrain them before they show any signs of aggression. He sighed, looking down at the ground before continuing. And then we hand them over to somebody else, somebody who can deal with this. We sure as hell can't. I know who he meant by that. I guess he just didn't want to admit it. Hathaway pulled out 2 rolls of duct tape, as well as what appeared to be 2 tranquilizer guns. I didn't bother asking why he had them. Slowly and quietly, we opened the door and walked out into the hallway. The lights above were dimmed, so we could see, but not that well. I was terrified at this point. I kept thinking about that damn bird. I didn't see what it actually did, but the results spoke volumes. I did not want to witness how that translated over to humans. We walked down various corridors for about 5 minutes before we heard a soft voice to the hallway left of us. It was Jake. This is roughly what he was saying. In time, we're in time. It doesn't make sense. I know that it doesn't. So what do? I can't stay like this. Obviously, this made no sense. What was even weirder was his tone. It wasn't devoid of emotion. In fact, it was quite the opposite. He sounded genuinely confused and afraid. Barely making any sound, Hathaway peeked past the corner, his vision aimed at the floor, presumably trying to avoid eye contact. However, as soon as he did this, he screamed and jumped backwards. I asked him what he'd seen, but he wouldn't turn to face me. A second later, I found out why. I saw him. I saw his face. When I peered over, he was lying on the floor, staring right at me. Fuck! I stumbled backwards, horrified at this sudden revelation. Don't worry, he told me. I'll take care of Jake, and then I'll take care of myself. Just go find Colin, and be more careful than I was. Without needing further conviction, I turned and ran the other way. As I did, I heard the sounds of a struggle and Hathaway screaming out in pain behind me. There was also laughter, for some reason. Hysterical, deranged laughter. It sounded nothing like Jake. I ran across corridors, making sure to only look to the walls, so that I could just see in front of me from my peripherals. I nearly jumped out my skin when I heard somebody call out from behind me. It was Beth this time. I'd nearly forgotten about her in all the panic. However, I wasn't taking risks. I raised the tranquilizer pistol towards her general direction. What's going on? She asked, sounding terrified. I responded curtly and directly. Have you looked into anybody's eyes since we left the lab? She let out a near whimper. No, why? Oh God, don't tell me. Yeah, it's out. I told her, still aiming the weapon at her. Fuck, well, I haven't made eye contact with Colin, alright? Now, I suppose that most people would have let up in this situation. She obviously wasn't infected, right? But there was something wrong with what she just said. Why did she mention Colin specifically? Why didn't she just say that he hadn't made eye contact with anybody? In addition to that, something about her tone was off. It was like a bad actor trying to deliver a line. I didn't know how to react, so I just froze there. Eventually, Beth started speaking again. Is that a tranquilizer gun? Because that won't do anything. Before I could even react, she lunged at me. I closed my eyes as I felt her nails dig into my skin, and then into my face. She was trying to forcefully pry open my eyelids. Luckily, I had about 90 pounds on her, so I managed to throw her off of me. The whole time she was assaulting me, she was letting out some kind of extremely deep, throaty chuckle, as opposed to Jake's boisterous, hysterical one. Beth got back up in an instant and lunged at me again. This time, I managed to put her into a choke hold. However, she wouldn't go unconscious. I must have held her there for about 3 minutes, but her relentless scratching eventually made it a task too difficult. I pushed her away and started running. As I bolted out of there, I could hear her coming after me, still letting out that disturbing chuckle. The weirdest part was that I could also hear her palms hitting the floor. Was she fucking crawling? I didn't try and find out. I ducked into an adjacent lab and locked the door behind me. I heard her clawing at it from outside, so I just lied down on the floor for a while in order to catch my breath. God, she was still fucking laughing. What the hell was going on? Wait a minute, I thought. The laughing was too loud. It sounded like it was coming from in the room. Hesitantly, I checked the door. I nearly had a heart attack at what I saw. She was halfway through the damn door, but it was still closed. I could see her arms and face poking through the metal. Safe to say, I left immediately. Thankfully, there were 2 doors in the room, so I ran out into an adjacent hallway. I just wanted to get out of there. I started running frantically, trying to search for an exit, or a window, or anything. At that point, I was quite disoriented. I couldn't place where I was in the building. I still remembered to stay cautious, however. My heart nearly leapt out of my chest when I saw an illuminated exit sign. I followed it and was finally led to the door I entered through. However, Hathaway was blocking the entrance. He was hunched over, covering his eyes with his hands, and they were dripping blood. You know, I just feel weird right now. Not like myself, you know. I heard him utter out. I tried thinking about it. Had it been 3 hours since our encounter with Jake? Surely it hadn't been. I guess he eventually heard me, because he shifted himself towards my direction. Cam, is that you? He spoke in a soft but somewhat threatening tone. I don't know what happened. I tried killing Jake, but he just wouldn't die. I think it's coming now. I feel weird. What's happening to me? Can you tell me, Cam? Right after he said, a loud roar emanated from some corridor behind me. It was followed by what sounded like rapid crawling towards our direction. "Don't worry about me, Cam. I always make it." Hathaway kept going. "I always make it. I won't make it." He then fell to his knees, sobbing hysterically. I took the chance and bolted out the front door. As soon as I got out, I grabbed a bundle of nearby sticks and jammed the entrance. I'm pretty sure it won't last long, but it was the best I could do. I got into my car and sped down the mountain trail, back onto the highway. I got home about 30 minutes ago, and I have no idea what to do. Should I call the police? Are they even going to listen to me? What about the FBI? Surely that's the best option here. I'll probably end up doing that soon. That virus cannot spread more than it already has. God, when I saw Beth's face coming through the metal door, I don't think I can ever forget that. And her eyes, they looked like something straight out of hell. Her pupils were replaced by what looked like this dark purple vortex. It was all so fucked up. Wait, I made eye contact with her, didn't I? Shit.